Okay, so the first thing is, just for safety, this is going to be spinning around a lot, so if you have any like long things off a sweater or something, just make sure that they don't get caught in here, because this is going to be whipping around. If you have long hair, clean it up just so it doesn't get caught in there. What we're going to do then, what we're going to need is a few things. We'll need one of these, and that's called a bat, and that's just what the clay is thrown on. And there's 2 pins here. Obviously, you just put these in the pins, self-explanatory. Once we have that, we're going to also need a bucket of water. We're going to need a sponge. You're going to need probably something to kind of like make some undercuts, like a little wooden cutting tool. And then depending if you want, there's a lot of things in addition to these things that you could be using, but those are kind of the basic things. One other thing you'll need is a wire tool to cut your piece off of the bat. All right, so once you have all of the stuff, you're at your wheel, you have everything you need. You're gonna need the clay. For hand building, wedging the clay is important, but for throwing on the wheel, it's much more important. Okay. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be throwing balls of clay that are about roughly 1.5 pounds. They look like it's the size of a snowball. Over on the wedging table, there's a circle drawn on there that you can kind of like put the ball on just to see if it's roughly the size. We're doing roughly 1.5 pounds. It looks like if you were to throw a snowball. So make sure it's wedged really well. If you have clay that has some little bit harder areas and softer areas, that's all going to affect throwing on the wheel. So wedge it really well. Also, clay is the type of thing that if it sits in one position, it kind of gets stuck in that position a little bit. When you start kind of wedging it, it just makes it more pliable and it's way easier to throw. You'll notice to do the wheel well, all of these things have to be working together. So if you skip the step like you don't wedge well, that's going to affect everything else. So everything kind of has to be in order for it to be done well, especially at the beginning when you do it. Okay, so you have I suggest starting with a ball of clay. The shape is round like this. The first thing that we have to do is take this ball of clay and we have to center it on the wheel. We want it centered. So we're going to throw it down on there. If your wheel is very wet and you throw it down, it's not going to stick well, it's going to slide around. So you want it to be not saturated with water and clay. You want it to be able to stick on there when you're doing like this. So you throw it on the center of the wheel as close to center as possible. And then we have a little switch on and off over there, and then we have a little gas pedal that works the wheel. When you start it, the first thing you want to do is center it. It means we're going to center it into like the shape of a hockey puck-ish in the center of the wheel. When you start, it's very important to get your hands very wet and the clay wet, because the clay is going to be sliding through your hands. And if your hands or the clay are not wet, it won't slide through, it'll stick to it, and it's already going to be very difficult. So make sure that the clay is sliding through your hands like this. Doesn't mean you have to pour a gallon of water on it, just enough that it slides through. Okay, now, what I like to do for the first motion is kind of before I say that, I want to just say one general rule. You really want to be braced. No matter what you do on the wheel, you want to brace yourself. So you'll notice I'm kind of have all my weight on my knees so that my hands are not easily kind of thrown around. The whole idea is not to let the clay move your hands. It's for you to be able to have control over your hands. If you can make your hands so they're not moving around with the clay and they're steady, the clay will automatically center. It's the hardest thing. Most people are like this, and it's like the clay is just throwing them around. If the clay is throwing you around, it'll never get centered. So get down, get braced, so that you can kind of use all of your, the power of this tripod. Now my first move is I like to just kind of push towards the center just to make sure it's stuck onto the wheel well. So this hand is just there kind of guiding, it's not doing anything. And this one I'm just kind of slowly putting pressure on here. Remember, it's harder to put pressure out here. You have a lot more control on this part of your hand for like not letting the clay move it around. Your fingers are hard to kind of control. Here is a lot easier. So anyway, I'm just putting pressure on the clay. I'm pushing it down basically like this. Okay, now what I like to do is, because like I said before, the clay likes to get stuck in a place where it's at. It's nice to do something called coning it up, where it kind of comes up in a cone and then you put it back down and you cone it up. It just makes the clay very malleable. So I'm kind of just braced. I'm going to start with the heels of my hand, just slowly kind of pushing those together in a kind of a controlled way. And then if you just push the top over, it kind of goes down. And like I said, the reason for this is that it's just making the clay nice and malleable. You'll notice I'm just pushing, all of it's right here. This is not as easy as it looks. So I'm just pushing it together, and then I'll just kind of flip it over on itself, and it goes right down. Now, to even center it, some people can't even, it's not easy for a lot of people, for most people, I would say. So, if it's off center, like this, you can see your hands moving around. So what you have to do is focus on, not on the clay, but on not letting your hands be moved around. So what I'm doing now is I'm focusing on my hands being nice and still. And everything's braced. This time when I'm centering, I'm kind of pulling everything towards me or pushing everything kind of towards the center with my whole body. Okay? So I'm pushing here, and this I'm putting here just to flatten it out a little bit because we want to start with like a hockey push. You see my hands aren't moving. If my hands aren't moving, that means it's going to be centered. So there's a kind of a hockey-ish shape of clay that's centered, and you can see it's centered just by eye. So after it's centered, like I said, you might spend your first week and a half just trying to figure out how to center it, so don't get frustrated. This is not something for people that easily get frustrated. All right, after it's centered, it's in a hockey puck shape. You're gonna open the center and make it into a donut shape, because the shape we're starting with is a cylinder, because all of the shapes are based off a cylinder. All right, so it's centered. I'm just gonna take my fingers. A lot of people do this different ways, and it depends on how much clay you have. It depends on the size of your hands and all that stuff. They'll put it in there with their thumbs to open it up in the center. I like to use this finger because my hands are a little bit larger. So I'm just gonna slowly push down to open up the center. Just slowly put the pressure down. Don't move it around, just everything you can throw without even looking, because it's all about your hands not moving. You're concentrating on your hands not moving. So you're gonna go all the way down till there's about 1/4 of an inch at the bottom. If you go all the way down to the bat, then you're gonna have a tube, and you're not gonna have a base on your thing. So you have to stop with about 1/4 of an inch at the bottom. Once you get to about 1/4 of an inch at the bottom, you're gonna open it up to whatever the width is of your pot. So you'll open it up. The way I do that is I just very slowly start to pull towards myself. And when you pull towards yourself, it just opens up. I'm just evaluating this donut shape and seeing, is it centered? Yeah, it's centered. Yours will probably not be, okay? So take some time and center it as well as you can. This is the time, if you want to do anything with the base, you have to do it now, because once it's taller, you can't get your hand in there. So what I do is I just take my finger and I go down to the bottom, and I just make a nice, smooth, flat floor, basically. And when you're doing this, you really want to do that. It makes it nice and flat, but it also compacts the clay, which is very important. You want it to compact the clay. Okay, so I'm down there. I just go in there, I compact it, it's flat. If you have a lot of extra water, which you might, I don't necessarily, but if you have a lot of extra water, it's probably good to get some of that out now. And you got the floor. I like to do a little swirly thing just for fun. Okay, so you've centered the clay into a hockey puck. You've opened the center so that it's like a donut shape. And now what you're gonna do is you're gonna go on the side of the clay that leaves your hands. So that's gonna be the right side. If you're over here, the clay is moving out of my hand. You see that? If I'm on this side, the clay is going into my hand. You see it rotating. You don't want it rotating into your hand. You wanna be over here where it's rotating out of your hand. And you're gonna go down to the bottom, and you're just going to slowly pinch the clay and slowly bring it up. Go back down, pinch the clay, slowly bring it up. You're just doing that motion to bring up the walls. The tendency when you first start is for these walls to kind of go out. It'll kind of, for some reason, it naturally kind of goes out into a bowl shape. So you might want to use your outer hand over here just to kind of force it to stay in. It's just a thing you're going to encounter. I'm just preemptively trying to tell you how to fix it. Okay, so I'm going to go in there, pinch some of it, pull it up. The better you become at ceramics, the faster you can do this. You can just do it once or twice and it'll be up. When you're doing it, it might take a lot of times just because you don't want to overdo it. You don't know the feel of it. And so take your time with this part. All right, so it's going out of my hand. My hand's going down there, pinching it a little bit, bringing it up. Pinching it a little bit more, bring it up. And I'm kind of guiding with my outer hand, just slowly raising it up. Okay, that was the first one. I pulled it up. At this point, look at it. Is it center? Is it not center? Fix it now. It's something that, if it's not centered, it's going to keep compounding and get worse and worse. So you got to fix it before you keep going. Okay, that was the first one. Now I'm going to go in, make sure it's slipping through your hands really well. And I'm going to go in again. Since there's more clay out here, I'm going to use this outer edge, this outer hand to kind of pull it in, pull it up. You saw, look at you can see the ring on the outside. I just pulled that in. Pull it up. And it's a little bit taller. If you're making a cylinder, you want the wall straight up and down. If the top of your cylinder starts to flare out, which it probably will, you can just go in and kind of squish it back in with your hands. The clay is malleable, so you can just push it back in. All right? And maybe I'll just do one more here. So I'm just going to go in and do this final pull. And again, it flared out just a little bit at the top. I'm going to just take a second and just kind of go in and just make sure it's nice and straight. Establish your lip. This is the lip of it where it's nice and centered. And what you really want to do then is you can look over at that poster behind Cece. You'll see the wall thickness from the top to the bottom to the floor is all the same thickness. What you're going to notice on yours is at the bottom it's going to be really thick, and instead of the wall on the inside going straight down like an L, it's going to kind of look like a U shape, and there's going to be a lot of clay down here at the bottom. So you really want to practice working down there, getting all of that from down there and using all of that clay. All right, and then you have a cylinder. At this time, you can take stuff like this. If you want to make it straighter, you can very carefully kind of go in and it'll make the wall nice and straight. What I do not want to see you do, because it's a really bad habit, is like, let's say there's a lot of weight in here. I don't want you to stop the wheel and start scratching at it. There should be nothing done on the wheel where it's not spinning, because otherwise you're just kind of carving away. At least at the beginning while we're learning this. Don't stop and take a thing and carve it away. Like, everything should be done on the wheel while it's spinning. The reason we're doing this is when it spins, you're touching every side of the pot, which makes it nice, like a nice uniform shape. So I'm just going to make the side nice and flat. And you got a nice straight side. And then if you want, or what you should do then, is at the very bottom, just make a slight undercut. This makes a little bit like a nice finished edge. I just cut the edge just a little bit, and that'll help when you're cutting it off the wheel. Just get it off there like that. And then what we'll have to do is when you're happy with it, work on the surfaces, but never do this, where it's not spinning, where you kind of like, you're totally defeating the purpose of being on the wheel when you're kind of like, oh, there's a part there. If you want to do the lip better, have it spin and just kind of have it go through your hands. It's what's going to make it look very nice and symmetrical. Same with all the sides. And then at the end, if you'd like to see how you did, you can, okay, for you guys, when you're done, what you're going to do is you're going to cut it off the wheel with one of these. You'll just go underneath with your fingers, pull right through, and it just cuts it off the wheel. And what I like to do, because a lot of times it'll stick on there because you have clay down there, is I put a little water here, and when you pull that water through, that water gets between it, and see how it slips right off like that? Okay. Once it's like this, you'll have one of these things to put it on, a plate or something to put it on. And then we have these things over by that metal shelf, and these just kind of help you to pick it off. And you just go in there, scoop it, pull it up, put it on here. What you're going to want to do is when you're practicing, I'm going to cut mine right in half just to see how well I did. You see how the wall thickness is pretty evenly distributed all the way down and then all the way to the bottom like this? Yours, when you first start, will probably be like this, thin, and then it gets real thick and like a U shape here, having a lot of clay in the corner. That's what you're going to really want to try to not do. Okay? All right. Other than that, that's it. Once you're done with it, you have it on here, you can just let it dry. For the cleanup, these things disattach. So any like big chunks of clay that you're not going to use, let's say I'm not using this, just goes over in our normal red bucket. Anything that you have in a bucket here, there's a white bucket way over against the wall in the sink. All of that slurry water, just pour that in there. Okay? So if you have, like this has got a lot of clay in it, you'll bring it over that white bucket and just dump it in there. So you have this is gone, this is gone. These things, they can just disattach like this. Be very careful and just kind of slide it out like this. Take this off, you can bring it over to the sink, wipe it down. This bat comes off, you can wipe that down. And just make sure that the wheel is nice and clean. After it's nice and clean, the part that has the U in it, you'll notice this one, I'm gonna get it all over, does not have a U shape on it. The part that has the U shape is towards you, and just flatten it and then just kind of slowly push it in like this. This one kind of goes underneath that, like that. Just pushed in, and it'll be nice and clean. And we got to make sure we clean up the wheel after we're done. So I'd give yourself at least 10 minutes to clean up. I know it's a lot. I'm good now. Is there any questions that anybody has about this?